Welcome to another story made by Oracle 1. The whispers in the dark of the ancient crypt. The wind howled through the desolate valley like a wounded animal, its mournful cries echoing off the jagged cliffs. The storm had passed, but the scent of rain still clung to the air, that damp, metallic tang that spoke of things buried deep beneath the earth. At the valley's heart, surrounded by ancient oaks and tangled roots, stood a ruin no map dared to mention, a crumbling monastery from centuries past. Its bell tower was split in half, its stones slick with moss, and below it, hidden by layers of fallen ivy, was the entrance to the crypt. Dr. Elias Mercer stood at the threshold, lantern in hand, his breath a visible ghost in the cold air. The others, his assistant Clara, the historian Father Duval, and two hired diggers named Garrison and Hale, lingered behind him, each wearing the same nervous expression. "This is it," Elias said softly, brushing mud from the engraved stone lintel. "The tomb of Saint Aurelius." Clara frowned. "You mean the cursed tomb? Every local we spoke to told us not to open it." Elias gave her a small, humorless smile. "Every discovery worth making comes with warnings." Father Duval crossed himself. Saint Aurelius was no saint in the end. He renounced his vows. The legend says he turned from the church and made a pact with something that whispered to him from beneath the earth. The lantern light flickered as if in agreement. Elias studied the carved sigil above the doorway, a circle intersected by 3 lines, surrounded by Latin script so eroded it looked almost like claw marks. "Superstition," he said. "There's no such thing as cursed whispers, Father. Only echoes." The old priest looked unconvinced. "Echoes of what?" Elias didn't answer. He handed his lantern to Clara and pressed his gloved hands against the heavy stone door. With Hale and Garrison's help, they pried it open inch by inch. A deep groan rolled out. Not just stone shifting, but something older, deeper, like the earth exhaling after centuries of being sealed. The smell hit them first. Rot, damp, a sweetness that made the back of the throat ache. Clara gagged. "God, it smells like something died down there." Father Duval murmured, "Something did." Elias lit another lantern and began his descent down the narrow staircase. The others followed, the light dimming as they went deeper until it seemed the darkness itself pressed against them, trying to smother the glow. The stairs ended in a wide chamber, circular and domed, its walls lined with alcoves containing stone coffins. Water dripped from the ceiling, collecting in shallow pools that reflected the lantern light in trembling ripples. At the center stood a sarcophagus unlike the others, carved from black marble veined with red, its lid sealed by iron clasps that had not rusted despite the centuries. Garrison whistled. "That's not normal stone, Doc." Elias knelt beside it, running a hand along the edge. "Obsidian, not native to this region. Whoever built this tomb went to great lengths to make sure it stayed sealed." Father Duval's voice trembled. "It wasn't built to honor him. It was built to contain him." Elias ignored the warning. "Hale, bring me the crowbar." As they pried at the first clasp, a faint vibration passed through the floor, so subtle it could have been imagination. Then came a sound, a whisper, so faint it might have been the wind slipping through the cracks. But there was no wind down there. Clara froze. "Did anyone hear that?" The men exchanged uneasy glances. Elias exhaled sharply. "The air's shifting. That's all." The second clasp gave way with a shriek of metal. Then the third. When the lid finally slid open, a rush of cold air poured out, extinguishing one of the lanterns. Clara gasped. Inside the coffin lay a figure wrapped in crimson cloth, its face hidden beneath a gilded mask shaped like a human skull. In its hands rested a black, leather-bound tome, the edges scorched as if it had once been on fire. Father Duval stepped forward, trembling. That mask. The old texts say he wore it to hide what he had become." His words died as the mask shifted. Only slightly, as if something inside had taken a shallow breath. Clara dropped the lantern. The glass shattered, oil spilling and flaring to life. Shadows danced madly across the walls. Elias reached into the sarcophagus, his academic curiosity overpowering fear. "Help me lift him," Father Duval shouted. "No. Leave him." But it was too late. As Elias's hands brushed the cloth, a low hum filled the chamber, deep, resonant, like the groan of a great bell. The walls trembled. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. Then the whispers came. They rose from every shadow, every crack in the stone. Dozens of voices, overlapping, speaking in a language none of them understood, sibilant, intimate, wrong. Clara clutched her ears. "Make it stop. Please, make it stop." Elias staggered back, the tome clutched to his chest. The mask stared up at him, gleaming in the firelight. For a moment, he thought he saw movement behind the eye sockets. Something black and liquid swirling within. Then silence. The tremors ceased. The fire dimmed. "Everyone out," Elias said hoarsely. Now, they climbed back into the open air, coughing and gasping, the first gray light of dawn brushing the horizon. Elias looked down at the tome in his hands. It was warm to the touch. Almost pulsing. Clara stared at him, eyes wide. "You shouldn't have taken that." Elias managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's history, Clara. And history belongs to those who uncover it." Behind them, the crypt door rumbled softly, not closing, not opening, just breathing. The camp was set a mile from the crypt, near the river where the ancient trees grew so close together their branches knit into a canopy that blocked out the moon. The expedition tents glowed faintly under lamplight, a pocket of fragile warmth amid the encroaching dark. By the time they returned, the rain had started again, soft at first, then harder, until the rhythmic tapping on the canvas seemed to mimic the murmuring that still lingered in their heads. No one spoke much. Clara busied herself wiping mud from the equipment. Garrison and Hale huddled by the fire, drinking from a flask that passed between trembling hands. Father Duval sat apart, his rosary clutched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Only Elias seemed calm, too calm. He had laid the crimson-wrapped body back in a protective covering and set the obsidian mask on the table beside the tome. Both objects seemed to draw the light toward them, the shadows stretching unnaturally long wherever they rested. He examined the mask first. The craftsmanship was astonishing, smooth, symmetrical, the gold so pure it caught even the dimmest gleam and held it. But what fascinated him most were the fine etchings carved along the inner rim, lines of script so delicate they could have been etched by a spider's leg. He leaned closer, tracing one symbol with a gloved finger. It felt warm, as though the gold retained a memory of breath. "Clara," he said softly, not looking up. "Bring my magnifier." She hesitated. "Dr. Mercer, I don't think we should." "Please," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She fetched the glass and placed it beside him. The instant her hand brushed the edge of the mask, her expression changed. Her pupils widened, her breath hitched. "Clara?" She blinked, backing away as if waking from a dream. I heard something." Elias frowned. "Heard what?" She pressed a hand to her temple. "A voice. Whispering, my name." Elias glanced at the mask, then at her. "You've been under a lot of stress. Hallucinations are." "I know what I heard," she snapped. Father Duval's voice broke the silence. "Objects of sin hold voices of the damned. You've brought it into our midst." Elias sighed. "We've brought history, Father. Not demons." But as he turned back to the mask, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. A fine crack running from the left eye socket down to the jawline, as if the mask had smiled. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he looked away. "Get some rest, everyone. We'll begin cataloging in the morning." That night, sleep did not come easily. The rain never stopped, it drummed and hissed, sometimes soft, sometimes savage. The air was thick, heavy, clinging. Every time Clara closed her eyes, she swore she could hear breathing, not from outside, but from within the tent, slow and measured, as if someone stood inches from her ear. When she finally drifted into uneasy slumber, she dreamed of the crypt. She saw the black sarcophagus again, open and waiting. The mask was floating above it, whispering words she couldn't understand. Around it, shadows moved, hundreds of them, flickering like candle flames. And then one of them turned toward her. It had no face, only the impression of eyes, blacker than the void. She woke with a start, heart pounding. Her lantern had gone out. The darkness was complete. Then she heard it, soft, gentle, coming from the table where the relics lay. "Clara?" The voice was unmistakable. Elias's voice. She swallowed hard. "Dr. Mercer?" No response. "Elias?" She reached for her lantern, hands trembling. The match flared, throwing long shadows against the tent walls. The table was exactly where she'd left it, but the mask was gone. Her breath caught. Something moved behind her. She spun, lantern held high. Elias stood in the doorway, rain pouring behind him. He looked pale, soaked to the bone. "Clara," he said quietly, "why are you awake?" I heard you call me." He frowned. "I've been outside, checking the excavation." Her eyes darted back to the table. The mask. But it was there again, sitting neatly where it belonged. Elias followed her gaze, then looked at her with concern. "You're exhausted. Get some sleep." She nodded numbly. But as he turned to leave, she could have sworn she saw his reflection in the lantern glass linger a moment longer than it should have. By morning, the air was colder. A mist clung to the trees, muffling sound. Garrison was gone. Hale found his boots by the river, one half submerged in the mud. "Tracks lead toward the ruins," he said, voice unsteady. Elias stared at the trail of footprints. They stopped abruptly a few yards in, as if Garrison had vanished mid-step. Father Duval murmured a prayer. He heard the whispers. They called him home. "Enough," Elias snapped. "He probably went exploring. The fog is thick, he could be lost." But as they prepared to search, something else caught their attention. Carved into the side of one tent, perfectly straight and precise, was the same sigil that had adorned the crypt door. Clara's stomach turned. "Elias, that wasn't there last night." He crouched, touching the mark. The fabric was cold, damp, but there was no ink, no soot, nothing that suggested it had been drawn. It was burned in. He stood slowly. "Pack up the relics. We're leaving after we find Garrison." They entered the forest as a group, Elias, Clara, Hale, and Father Duval, following the faint trail toward the monastery ruins. The fog was so thick it felt alive, curling around them, whispering through the leaves. Halfway there, Hale stopped. "Did you hear that?" They all froze. From somewhere ahead came a sound, a low humming, rhythmic, like chanting underwater. "Maybe it's him," Elias said. They followed it to a clearing near the crypt entrance. The mist parted just enough to reveal Garrison kneeling in the mud, his back to them. "Garrison!" Elias called out. No response. He took a cautious step forward. "Hey, we've been looking." Garrison turned. His eyes were gone. In their place were pits of shadow, black fluid seeping from them. His mouth moved soundlessly, forming words that weren't his own. Father Duval began to pray, voice shaking. Then Garrison's jaw unhinged with a wet crack, and a chorus of voices spilled out, dozens overlapping, all whispering the same word. "Aurelius." The ground split beneath him. Mud and water churned violently, sucking him downward. His hands flailed for a moment, and then he was gone, swallowed whole by the earth. Clara screamed. Hale ran. Elias didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the spot where Garrison had vanished. The chanting had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, so total it pressed against their skulls. Then, faintly, a whisper. Not yet. They returned to camp in silence. Hale refused to stay another hour. I'm leaving, he said, throwing his gear into a sack. I don't care what you say. That place is wrong. Elias didn't argue. He just sat at the table, eyes fixed on the tome. The leather was cracked, but the burn marks had faded overnight. New symbols were appearing along the spine, faintly glowing, like embers. Clara approached quietly. Elias, we had to destroy it. He didn't respond. Elias? When he looked up, his eyes were different. Not fully, just subtly wrong. Like his reflection in the lake had stepped a fraction out of sync. I can hear them, he whispered. The voices. They're not evil, Clara. They're calling for release. She backed away. Release from what? He smiled faintly. From us. That night, the whispers filled the valley. They came from every direction, soft, beckoning, impossible to ignore. The camp's lanterns flickered wildly. The sigil burned again on the tents, brighter this time. Father Duval prayed until his voice gave out. Hale vanished sometime before dawn. When Clara woke, she was alone. Elias was gone. So were the relics. The crypt door was open again. The forest was still when Clara made her way back to the crypt. No birds sang. No insects stirred. Even the rain had stopped, as if the storm itself refused to touch that cursed valley anymore. She clutched the lantern tightly, every creak of its handle echoing far too loud in the silence. The mist curled around her legs like a living thing, whispering fragments of half-heard words, voices that rose and fell just beyond recognition. Elias? She called. Her voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees. No answer came, only the soft rhythm of water dripping from leaves. The ruins loomed ahead like the ribcage of some buried giant. Moss crawled up the stone walls, roots had torn through the floor, and the great door to the crypt, so heavy before, now stood ajar. A faint light pulsed from within. She hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct screamed to run, to leave the relics to the earth and never return. But she couldn't. She had seen Elias's face in that last moment before he vanished, something in his expression that wasn't him at all. So she descended. Each step down the stone staircase felt like wading deeper into the ocean. The air grew thick and cold, her breath fogging before her eyes. The smell was worse now, decay and wet stone and something sweet, almost like rotting flowers. When she reached the bottom, her lantern sputtered, fighting against the darkness. The sarcophagus stood open. The crimson cloth lay in tatters across the floor. The mask was gone, and in the center of the chamber, Elias knelt beside the tome, the lantern light casting his shadow high against the walls. His back was turned to her. Elias? He didn't move. She stepped closer, her boots sloshing through shallow water. Elias, please, look at me. We need to leave. The others, they're dead, or gone. He finally spoke, but his voice was wrong. Deeper. Resonant. They're not gone. He turned slowly, and Clara's breath caught. His skin was pale, almost translucent, veins black and pulsing beneath the surface. His eyes were pits of darkness, and when he smiled, his teeth looked too many, too sharp. Elias, she whispered, stepping back. What have you done? He tilted his head, studying her like a predator might study prey. Do you know what he offered me? The saint who was no saint. He whispered the truth of the earth. That death is not an ending, only a doorway. She shook her head, trembling. That voice you're hearing, it isn't Aurelius. It's something else. You're being controlled. Controlled? He said, smiling wider. No, Clara. I am chosen. He stood, and as he did, the water around them began to ripple, vibrating in rhythm with his words. The walls groaned, cracks spidering through the stone. He was buried alive, you know, Elias said softly. They feared what he became, what he could do. But he wasn't cursing the world, he was trying to save it. The flesh rots, the soul fades, but through the whispers, through the voice beneath, we can be eternal. Clara backed toward the stairs. Elias, please, you're scaring me. Don't be afraid, he murmured, stepping forward. You'll understand soon. She turned to run. The lights went out. Pitch black. Only the sound of water, and the echo of Elias's footsteps following her. She fumbled for the lantern, shaking it until the flame caught again. The chamber was empty. Elias was gone, but the tome lay open on the sarcophagus. The pages were wet, the ink bleeding together, forming strange, shifting shapes. The words twisted as she looked at them, rearranging themselves into something she could almost read. He waits beneath. He wears your voice. She slammed it shut. The ground trembled again. Somewhere deep below, something moved. A crack opened in the floor, wide enough for her to glimpse the blackness beneath, a pit that seemed to breathe. The smell that rose from it was unbearable. Whispers poured from the chasm, too many to count, too many to follow. They slithered across the walls, through her hair, around her wrists, like cold fingers. Then a single voice rose above the rest, speaking in perfect, crystal clarity. Clara. Her stomach dropped. It was her own voice. She staggered back, shaking her head. No, 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 no. You freed him, it said. Now he will free you. The lantern flickered violently, the flame stretching upward like it was being pulled. A shape began to emerge from the pit, tall, skeletal, draped in decayed robes, its face obscured by the gold mask. The crack along its cheek was the same one that had appeared after Elias touched it. It reached for her. Elias, she screamed. Please, help me. The creature stopped. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something human flicker behind the mask, familiar eyes, fighting to surface. Then, softly, Elias's voice came from its lips. Run. She didn't hesitate. She bolted up the stairs, clutching the lantern, tripping on the slick steps. Behind her, the walls shook. The whispers turned to roars. By the time she reached the surface, the earth was splitting open. The trees bent as if bowing to something vast beneath them. She sprinted through the forest, rain pelting her face, until she saw the camp, or what was left of it. Every tent had collapsed. The ground was scorched in circular patterns, as if lightning had struck repeatedly in the same place. In the center of it all stood Hale, or what used to be him. He was swaying gently, eyes rolled back, his mouth moving silently. Then she heard it, faint, like an echo inside her skull. Join us. She backed away. No. Hale turned his head, his jaw moving with a sickening crack. The voice that came out wasn't his. Clara, he's waiting. She ran. The forest twisted around her, paths changing, branches clawing at her clothes. Every direction led her back toward the same hill, the monastery ruins looming like a watchful corpse. No matter where she turned, the crypt door was there, open and waiting. The wind carried whispers again, but now they sounded almost like laughter. She fell to her knees, clutching her head. Please, stop, please. The air shifted, and then she heard Elias again, right behind her ear. Clara. She froze. Slowly, she turned. Elias stood a few feet away, soaked, shaking, his face pale and hollow-eyed. But this time, the voice that spoke from his mouth didn't match the man she'd known. Do you see now? It said. The crypt was never a prison. It was a gate. He reached toward her. His hand trembled, halfway between pleading and attack. You can't close it now. You opened it. Clara stumbled back. You're not Elias. He smiled sadly. He's still here, beneath, waiting to be let in. And before she could move, he seized her wrist. The world went silent. The forest, the wind, the rain, all vanished. There was only darkness and the faint sound of her own heartbeat, echoing like a drum in an infinite void. Then came the whisper, impossibly close, inside her head. "You've heard us for so long, Clara. It's time to answer." The world dissolved around Clara. The trees, the rain, even the ground beneath her seemed to fade into nothing, replaced by a suffocating void that pulsed and breathed as though it were alive. She tried to scream, but her voice came out as a whisper, thin, weightless, carried away by unseen winds. A faint glow flickered somewhere in the blackness, far away, the color of old candlelight. She stumbled toward it, her boots clicking against unseen stone. Her lantern was gone. Her hands shook as she reached forward, touching the air that felt both solid and fluid, as if reality itself had forgotten how to stay in place. The whispers surrounded her now, thousands of voices murmuring all at once. They overlapped, looped, and repeated, growing louder with every heartbeat until the sound became unbearable. Then, silence. A single voice spoke. "You opened the way." Clara turned. A figure stood behind her. A tall silhouette wrapped in shadow, its edges constantly shifting like smoke. Its face was hidden, but the gold mask gleamed faintly through the dark. "You've worn her skin before," Clara said shakily. "You used Elias. You used all of them." The figure tilted its head, the motion smooth and almost curious. "We did not use them. We remembered them. The flesh forgets, but the soul endures." "I won't let you take me," she whispered. "You already invited us in." The world rippled violently, and suddenly she was no longer standing in the void but back inside the crypt. The walls were dripping black ichor, the torches burning with ghostly blue flame. The sarcophagus had sealed itself shut again. Elias, or what was left of him, was kneeling beside it. His hands were pressed to the stone lid, his mouth moving in silent prayer. The veins in his neck were dark and pulsing. "Elias," she cried. He looked up. For a brief second, she saw him, really him, behind the eyes. His lips trembled. "Clara, help me," he rasped. "He's inside. I can't." Then the voice cut him off, deep and ancient, speaking through him with such force that the ground shuddered. "She cannot help you. She is the vessel." The realization struck her like a blade. It wasn't Elias they wanted. It was her. The whispers had followed her for years, since before this expedition, before the monastery, before she even knew what the crypt was. In her dreams, she'd always heard faint voices calling her name, promising knowledge, promising truth. She thought they were echoes of her father's madness, a genetic inheritance of obsession. But now she understood. They'd been leading her here all along. The light dimmed, shadows crawling across the floor toward her feet. The whispering rose again, no longer many voices but one, multiplied infinitely, echoing through every crack of the stone. "Say the words." She shook her head violently. "No, I won't." The mask appeared in her hands. She didn't know how it got there, only that it was heavy and cold, the gold darkened by time. The crack across its cheek was wider now, as if it were smiling. The voice inside her skull grew louder. "Say the words and see. The dead wait for you. They remember." She tried to throw the mask away, but it clung to her palms like it had melted into her skin. The edges bit into her flesh. Blood welled between her fingers. "Clara!" Elias shouted. "Don't." He didn't finish. His body convulsed, his eyes rolling back, and then his head snapped toward her in an inhuman angle. His voice, when it came, was a distorted mirror of hers. "You cannot flee what you were born for." The walls began to bend inward, the stone groaning as if the entire crypt were breathing. The water on the floor churned, turning dark as ink. Clara screamed, pressing the mask to her chest, trying to tear it off, to stop it from binding to her, but it was too late. The gold liquefied, spreading up her arms, wrapping around her face. Her vision dimmed. The whispers fused into one deafening hum. She saw everything. The monks building the monastery centuries ago, chanting prayers not to God but to the thing they called Aurelius. The nobleman whose face had been taken by the gold mask. The villagers dragged beneath the crypt, their souls consumed one by one. And then, herself. Over and over. Clara, in different centuries, different bodies, always standing before the sarcophagus, always clutching the mask, always letting him in. The curse wasn't a haunting. It was a cycle. Every generation, she returned. Every lifetime, she found the crypt again. That was the time loop. The whispers weren't calling new souls. They were calling her back. No, she whispered through the mask, her voice echoing 100-fold. Not this time. She staggered toward Elias, who had collapsed beside the sarcophagus. The air was freezing, her breath forming crystals as she exhaled. "Elias," she said softly. "If you can hear me, hold on." He looked up, eyes flickering with faint light. "Clara, what is happening?" She smiled through the tears, through the pain of the mask fusing with her skin. "I'm ending it." She turned toward the sarcophagus, pressing her bloodied hands against the carvings. Beneath the surface, she could feel movement, like something vast and ancient pressing back. The voice hissed inside her skull. "You would destroy what you are?" "Yes," she said, and she began to speak, not the words in the book, but the words she remembered from the prayers her father used to whisper to the sea. Words of release, not summoning. The crypt trembled. The walls cracked open, blue light spilling through them. The whispers screamed in fury, twisting her thoughts, trying to make her stop, but she kept going, louder and louder, until the air split like thunder. A blinding light filled the chamber. The last thing she saw was Elias reaching for her. Then everything went white. When the rescuers found the monastery days later, it was little more than rubble. The forest had burned in strange, perfect circles, and the ruins were buried under tons of collapsed stone. They recovered one body. A young man, drowned in a pool of blackened water. They never found Clara, but deep beneath the rubble, in the silence of the buried crypt, a faint golden glint shimmered beneath the ash. The mask, its crack was gone. Its surface was whole again. And if you listened closely, very closely, you could hear a woman's voice whispering inside it. Not screaming, not weeping, whispering, as though she were waiting to be found again. For more stories, like and subscribe.